Alrighty, boys and girls, the kid is back. That's right. It is another episode of the Red, White, Claret, and Blue show with your solo host this time, Alex, back from Japan, back in the Eastern time zone, and actually able to watch and talk about Villa and follow Villa because, as I said before, I couldn't get up at 1 a.m. for those games. Thank you to Chris, to Pat, um, to Chris's brother for all filling in. I honestly, I watched a little bit of and and his brother talking, and I could not tell them apart. I'm not sure which was Chris. I was listening to it. It just sounded like one voice the whole time. So congrats to you guys on being two of the most identical of triplets that God could possibly create. But anyway, one of your two American villain voices is back. Chris is at the House of Mouse with his kids, earning a well-deserved holiday. And so I need to pay him back by handling this one solo. I am still a little jet lagged, but certainly not as much as I was a zombie over the course of the weekend. So, had I tried to talk about this match then, I think it would have been awful. And as much as I did love Japan as a trip, I'm sure Chris and I will talk about more of this later this week. But I don't think I could move there because I could not follow the Villa. I'd be watching every match on replay, trying to stay off of social media until I woke up in the morning, and that just seems awful. So, whatever EPL fans are out there in Tokyo and Kyoto and Hakuba, kudos to you, man, because I don't know how you follow and stay up to date on the matches that way. But anyway, we are here to talk about the match that I did watch, not the ones that I did not, and that is Wolves. So let's start there with our match recap. And let's dive right in. This was certainly an interesting one at the outset. So Matt Cash got injured in the Champions League match. Garcia comes in at right back. Onana does make the bench, still not fit to start and give us 90. And so we continue to see Bogard there in the right defensive midfielder spot. And so this resulted in a really interesting build-up for Aston Villa, something we saw a little bit last year and have seen at points this year where Bogard in our build-up was actually responsible for dropping back into the back line and playing as a right center back. Konsa moves to the middle. Kamara moves over to left center back. And then you've got Luka Dean and Garcia high. And so there was a lot of change that was happening as we would move from defense to attack. McGinn in attack was more in the center, playing that 10-second striker role. Or sorry, I should say in defense, was in that 10-second striker role. When we move into attack, Bogard drops back, McGinn would drop back, play alongside Yuri Tielemans. Morgan Rogers comes into the middle, plays alongside Ollie Watkins, and then you've got the wingers high and wide with kind of floating in that left attacking midfielder spot. And then when possession changes, obviously all those players need to move around. And so that first half, I think everybody knows it was awful. It was terrible. By half, we should have been down 3 or 4 to nothing. And honestly, that would probably be generous. You had Guedes and Cunha often drifting off the left, trying to attack that Bogard Garcia spot, and it made sense. I think that not only is Garcia new to the system, Bogard obviously has been here all year, but hasn't necessarily played super effectively. If I were the Wolves manager, that's where I'd want to go attack guys unfamiliar and doing a lot of moving and interchanging and see if you can catch them on that break. And so you look at the 11th minute, and obviously Wolves score once again on their first shot on target. That was awful all around. A lot of people are going to point at Emi Martinez, saying that he can't get beat at his near post like that. And you're right, he can't. And this has certainly not been his best season in Claret and Blue. But really what I'm looking at is the build-up there and just how disjointed the whole team was. And we'll get into transfers later this episode, but more importantly, later this week. I think this goal epitomized why Kamara cannot be a long solution at left center back. And nothing against him. He's been an unbelievable defensive midfielder this year. And I've said it multiple times on this podcast. I think predictions wrong at the outset of the season when we said that Onana was going to completely supplant him. He's been great in that six role, but here you look at even when the ball came in first and was cleared out, Konsa and Kamara need to step equally at the same time. You go watch the play. Kamara jumps a good 10 yards ahead of Konsa, and there's actually a Wolves attacker behind him. Now Kamara thinks that he's putting him offside, but Konsa is slow to get out. They're not in sync, and so actually he would have been onside if they could play it in more quickly. Ball gets cycled in, cycled back around, and I don't know what Kamara is doing shooting into midfield, except that to say that that's his natural midfielder instinct. I need to step on the ball. So he steps up. There's no one behind him. That guy starts to make the run. And then again, midfield instinct, I have a center back behind me to cover that runner. It takes him a second to realize, oh crap, no, like I'm the one who needs to cover that runner. They're able to slip it in behind. He doesn't necessarily make the great effort back. And then obviously Emi Martinez beat it near post. But I think you saw three different instances in that one play why Kamara can't continue to play center back for us because he just doesn't have those instincts. Now, we might need to continue to use him for another or two, but I think we've just kind of shown our lack of center back depth and why we need other guys to fill in that role. It's not as easy as just saying, hey, throw Onana, throw Kamara, throw someone else back there, because it's a completely different way of field. Inverse, it also made me think about this thing that everyone keeps saying of, oh, tell Pau Torres to play in midfield. He's such a good passer. We should just move him in to one of the defensive midfielder roles and he'll be great. You can't. It's a different seeing the field. We've said it all before. So I hopefully people can see why this should also put that argument to bed as well. Kamara's day only gets worse in the 35th minute. Gets absolutely bullied by Cunha making that run to get the ball over the top, pushes him off. He looks for a soft foul. It's never a foul in my book. That's a 50-50 shoulder to shoulder. And again, he was too high up and wasn't able to track that runner. Ultimately does get it, gets pushed off. And ultimately Emi makes a great save on Cunha, and then Guedes on the follow-up just plays it wide when he can play it into an essentially open net. But again, Kamara not looking great in that center back role. And then the other big downside of the first half was Andres Garcia in my eyes. He certainly played a couple nice crosses in. He had a beautiful one to the far post, great shape on it, great bend on the ball. I think going forward, he did show some capability there. But everyone was beating him. His inability to track runners moving around him, in behind, who to cover, how to cut the passing lanes. They got so many opportunities targeting him with 2-on-1s and with open runners. Just defensive positional sense, something that we've really struggled with in that position this year, was on full view for everyone to see. The thing that really kind of gets me with that is that I still trust Matty Cash a lot more than him. And if we're going to criticize Matt Cash, if we're going to criticize Ned for not necessarily having the positional sense that Unai is looking for, I think it's clear that at least at first look, Garcia is not that yet. Now, caveat, huge step up to go from Spanish League Two, second division, to the EPL with the team competing in the final 16 of the Champions League. So I'm not sure what we really expected out of that signing. Again, probably one for the future, but not necessarily seeing this as Matt Cash is no longer our starting first choice right back in my mind, at least based on those 45 minutes he still is. And I think he was very justifiably pulled off at half. I think he was a huge liability that way. Now, 43rd minute, Kamara caught too high up again. Ball over the top, over to Guedes. I don't know where Garcia is tracking that runner either. Again, poor defensive positional sense, goes wide. And then 45th +3, Garcia beat for pace again on the inside, this time by Cunha. it was clear where they were attacking. They wanted to get the ball on the right side and then and play through. I should clarify, play through our right hand side and take advantage of those guys, and then exploit Kamara where they could. And I think that they were super effective at that. I think that also, candidly, the formation that Unai had us go out in with the tactics that he did was probably a bit naive to expect that many new players in new positions to be able to execute. Like I said, there's a lot of moving from right defensive midfield to right center back to right wing, number 10 down to defensive midfielder. Kamara just not necessarily knowing his position too well. I think it was probably too complicated a formation and a tactical approach. And then when you tack on the fact that we're coming out of Europe where we've always been sluggish and lethargic and not ready to go, I think it was a little too much for these guys. So fair play to Unai. He realized that at halftime, Konsa seemed to be the only player who was awake and willing to play for anything whatsoever. Ali, Ramsey, and Rogers were incredibly isolated in the first half, barely got a sniff. And unfortunately, then Ali also injures his groin. Everybody was talking about with the Duran sale. Oh, it's fine. Ali's never injured. Now he's got a groin strain, and we hope that it's not important. We hope that it's not long term, but this does show the weakness of potentially that approach of selling your backup striker. So let's go to the second half. As we all know, Unai makes 4 changes, and it really seems to work. Bogard moving into that right back spot, a little bit more natural as coming across to a right center back. I know we don't love him as a right back, particularly how inept he is offensively. But still, in terms of just overall formation and solidity, I think it worked a lot better than the him Garcia combo that we were trying to go with in the first half. And so let's jump to the 53rd minute where we finally put the ball in the back of the net. Ball goes out wide, comes across to Mullen, who ultimately pulls it in. Linesman raises his flag for offsides. Now, I'm honestly surprised that this is even a debate. So I've seen all the tweets from the neutral observers of Domino's and Paddy Power and whatever, and Specsavor, saying that they can't help the refs make the right call here. I actually, maybe I'm in the wrong here, but Rogers clearly runs in an offside position, and when the ball is played, he is still offsides. When I've seen the view from behind, he clearly makes contact with the defender there. It might be marginal, but he does make contact. And more importantly, the rule reads to me that you can't, from an offsides position, impede the defender or obstruct the defender from making a challenge on the ball. And so, in my eyes, my interpretation of that rule, if Rogers stands a foot and a half behind Semedo, and Semedo still needs to alter his run to get to Ramsey because of Rogers in an offside position standing there, he's still impacting the play. It's kind of like screening the goalie. You don't necessarily need to deflect the ball to have screened the goalie and made an impact on the play. So if Semedo needs to change his run to run around Rogers to block that cross, it's still offsides. And I think everybody is expecting him to make some big, like, elbow, basketball type screen. And I don't think that's necessarily needed to meet the bar of the law of being offside. So that's point one. Now, point two, what everybody comes back to is the linesman wasn't raising for that. The linesman raised for Mullen being offsides, which was wrong. I actually agree with that. I think that the linesman probably was raising his flag, thinking Mullen was offsides. VAR went back and then saw the screen. But that's the point of VAR. You're supposed to see what happened in the build-up to the goal and call any fouls, obstructions that should have happened. And so I think when VAR reviewed the goal anyway, whether the linesman had raised his flag or not, they would go back, see Rogers in an offside position, obstructing Semedo, and probably make the call, or should have made the call, that he was offsides. Letter of the law, like it was. So I think for both of those reasons, I don't really think that Villa have much to complain about. The other big refereeing decision, Rodgers potentially getting his foot stepped on in the lead up to Wolves' second goal. Yes and no. I've seen the screenshot. I've also seen it live 5 times. Live, it did not look like a foul to me. And so I would struggle if the shoe were on the other foot, boot were on the other foot, so to speak. I would struggle if they went all the way back and called that against Villa. But what I will also say to counteract that, we can't say that the two controversial refereeing decisions only went against us. You know, we look at the 59th minute, Mullen trying to make a clearance. If you're going to freeze frame it, clearly kicks the back of the foot of the Wolves attacker, um, slides under, and then the ball gets swept away. If we're talking fine margins enough to say that Rodgers is fouled in the build-up to Wolves' second goal, then to me that Mullen kick is a penalty. Now, I don't think that the Mullen kick is a penalty in real time, just like I don't think that Rodgers was fouled in real time. But if you're going to say one is, then you got to say the other is, and then you're giving Wolves another shot on goal. Also, none of this necessarily changes the fact that Wolves missed multiple open nets in the first half and probably should have been 3 or 4 clear by halftime. So I'm not, you guys know me. I'm not going to sit here saying that, but for the referee, we would have at least gotten a point out of or potentially won that game. We did not play well enough. We played better in the second half. But where I will give the refs some grief is that when we get to the 74th minute, uh, Wolves really killed the game. For 30, 35 minutes there, we were dominating. We were clearly banging on the door. We were creating all kinds of different opportunities. 65th minute, you see the impact that these substitutions made. By the 65th minute in the second half, we had 8 touches in Wolves' box. In the entire 45 minutes of the first half, we had 2. So half the time, 4 times as many touches in the box. Clearly, the halftime substitutions and the tactical adjustments really made an impact. But then the ref let them kill the game. So you've got them creating a substitution issue. You've got them sitting on the ground for a while. You see them taking forever to take a free kick. And there was like 6 minutes where there was one passage of play, maybe. And then we get to the 80th, and it's really hard for Villa to regain that forward momentum, that push. And I think the referee really needed to use his cards better in that situation, really needed to egg Wolves on, get them moving, get the ball going, because he really let them through, not the game, not killing the game off by being slow, passing the ball around, whatever, but just by delaying to just kill any opportunity that Villa had to tie that one up. So I think that is an area where the referee could have managed the entire game a lot better. End of the day, though, what opportunities did we have? Malen clearly offsides in my eyes. And then Leon Bailey maybe has our best opportunity in the 62nd. I think it's a great move and a great cross by Maatsen and a really good shot by Bailey that's gonna find the bottom corner, but ultimately, the 2 Wolves defenders block it. That's about all I can remember as true opportunities that Villa had to score. And when you look at a team in Wolves that's conceded 52 times this year already, that was sitting in the relegation zone at the start of the match, that's not good enough. That's not good enough for a team that needs to that wants to be competing for Europe, is in the final 16 of the Champions League, and wants to prove that it belongs amongst the biggest clubs in the league. It's just not. You need to do better than that. And so if we're going to continue with the bad points, another loss after a Champions League match, wasn't even away this time. We are now, I believe, 1-1-6 in our last 8 away games in the Premier League. Not good enough form for someone who's going to be competing at the upper top 5 of the table, upper quarter of the table. Still conceded with the first shot on target again. Looked relatively ineffective offensively against a low block and a bottom tier side. And Iron Man Ollie injured, and we'll see what happens. But even if he does play within the next couple weeks, carrying a groin or hamstring injury like that is certainly not ideal. So if we look at the overall impact on the season. Um, it was an opportunity for Villa to close the gap on the top four, put ourselves within a win of those Champions League places. Instead, 3 points dropped against a team that you really got to be expecting 3 points against, and that has become a theme this year. Our inability to just kind of get over that hump when the opportunity has been presented to us. Um, but at the very least, and I apologize. I was negligent. I forgot this before. Good points. Malin did look decent as an auxiliary striker. Certainly a creative player, and so having him across the front line, I think bodes well for us. It just gives us a different look, a different dynamic, someone that we can utilize. Um, but yeah, losing grip on what appears to, knock on wood, be the top five for the Champions League places next year. So with that, let's jump ahead to the transfers. I guess we don't really have some banners for this, so I'll just call it cold water for now. I suppose we're pouring cold water on everybody's opinions on the transfer window. Window shut 2.5 hours ago. Chris and I will do a full analysis and debrief later this week, what to expect from our new signings, all that kind of stuff. But wanted to give some quick thoughts on sort of the five major transitions that we have. We won't cover, Swinkles going out on low or on loan or anything like that. But very much seemed to be a one in, one out policy at Villa this January. And so kind of match these up by where the swaps were. And we'll talk about whether it's an upgrade or a downgrade. So out, Jaden Philogene, in Daniel Mallon, roughly equal money. I think this is an undoubted upgrade. Chris and I talked about this when we previewed Mallon as a player and the fees earlier. Was it late last year or earlier this year at this point? I guess it was earlier this year. So I won't go too much into that, but definitely an upgrade. Out, our dear friend Kostin Nedjelkovic to Red Bull Leipzig, who are fourth in the Bundesliga. Shocking that maybe a team that high wanted him, with a 15 million euro buy option, allegedly, and in Andres Garcia from Levante for 8 million euro. So this one puzzles me a little bit. Based on early returns yesterday, I'm not sure that Andres Garcia is a better player. If the buy gets permanent by Leipzig, I mean, we did make a quick profit on Ned, who barely kicked a ball for us. But it's interesting. I thought early returns on him looked promising, as did Chris, as did a few different people. We certainly pointed out some of his deficiencies in terms of his weak side positional awareness and things like that. But there seemed to be something of a player there, and so I'm surprised that we are cutting bait that soon for someone who doesn't necessarily look like he provides something clearly different. Maybe a little bit better of a crosser, can play a little wider as opposed to Ned, who seemed to dribble and float inside. But again, tough to see. We'll call that one maybe a wash. Out, Emi Buendia on loan, who just won man of the match in his first match for Leverkusen, and in Marco Asensio from PSG. We will be covering all of Asensio's wages. This is maybe an upgrade, could easily be a wash. All I'll say is that Asensio has only played 28 minutes and only made 3 appearances since November 26th. So we're looking at over 2 months now. And no, he has not been injured. He has been in the match day squad every time and has not been selected. So falling out that quickly at, I'll just say, a team that is 15 spots lower than us in the Champions League table. I mean, draw your own conclusions. Out, Diego Carlos to Fenerbahce, in Disasi from Chelsea. Finally, they did not want to do a deal with us, but he only wanted Villa, only wanted to play the Champions League, so kudos to him. Highly rated at Monaco. Right now, I'm calling it a wash, but I lean towards this being a good move, overall, an upgrade. We got money for an old Diego Carlos, oldish, I guess, someone entering the back stages of his career, who has been coming off some pretty significant injuries for a much younger player, highly rated at Monaco. I mean, couldn't necessarily get through in that massive glut that is the two Chelsea squads. Um, but maybe he becomes something. He's on loan. There's not necessarily a buy option, so we would need to negotiate with Chelsea if it goes well. But at the very least, Carlos was one of our higher earners. I have to imagine Disasi is on lower wages, so we save a little bit of money there. We bank the money from the ultimate sale. Um, would have preferred this to be a left center back, knowing how long Pau Torres is out, but still good to have that right sided back in there, and at least for Spurs, we can hopefully play two, or I guess he can't play because he's probably cup tied. But moving forward, we have at least two fit center backs that we know of that can go out there and play. So I'll lean towards this one being a positive, even if he does make similar mistakes or something of that sort. And then the final one, and this is the one that I'm sure you all know I have the most to say on. My countryman John Duran out to Al Nasser in Saudi Arabia, and in is Manchester United's forgotten talisman, Marcus Rashford. I think I'm really struggling to understand what appears to be completely unfettered excitement about this one. And I think that's kind of the coldest way that I can put it. Cold water way. On the one hand, on the Durant front, I get it. I still don't believe it's so much him. I do believe that it was his agent and the people around him that are really looking to make a payday, but I get it. He had become a problem. Every uh every window they were talking about different moves. There were all different kinds of rumors out there. I stand by what I said in the last couple podcasts where the previous report said that he was very happy and comfortable at Villa. It was just other people inquiring. Um, I also believe some of the reports that he was a handful in the locker room, showing up late, a little immature, all that kind of stuff, needed to grow up. And and I understand why that would be frustrating and destabilizing. What I'm struggling to understand though is how that translates to excitement and belief that we have made a massive upgrade in signing Marcus Rashford. If you take his name and Manchester United out of it, because I think a lot of this excitement is wanting to dunk on Manchester United, being able to say, yeah, Manchester United player wanted out to go to Villa because he wanted to play Champions League, not fight relegation. And I get that. That's funny. That's exciting. But take that out of it and just look at the man on paper. You're talking about a guy who has not been good for over 2 seasons. It was 3 seasons ago that he scored that boatload of goals. So if you tell me this is a player who hasn't been good in 3 seasons, he's been repeatedly caught out partying in different cities in advance of big games and not necessarily showing up, showing effort. He's been dropped now by multiple managers, and the club that is supposedly his boyhood club that he's been a fan of for 20 some odd years has dropped him, and he can't even show the will to fight to get back into that team that's supposedly been in his heart since day one. He doesn't want to try for them. Why is he gonna come now and try for Villa? Then you tack on his wages. With Villa covering 70 to 90% of the wages, depending on what you read and the different incentives that are met, he's probably making at least 100, 150K more than our current highest earner. And so you're telling me that with that behavior and that salary, and the fact that he's 27 and supposed to be an adult, 6 years older than John Duran, you're saying that that's not going to be a distraction in the locker room or has the potential to be an even more destabilizing force than John Duran? He hasn't performed all year. I think whatever you say about John Duran, we know that we had him signed for 6 more years. He signed that extension in October. The club could have said, honestly, forget it. You're not going anywhere. Keep playing. And I think we all believe that he probably would have kept scoring over the remainder of this season and ultimately pushed a move out in the summer. And maybe we get less money for him then because clubs know that we're really under it. He's become a bigger problem, whatever. But even if you think he's going to be the next Balotelli had a couple good years at Man City while they still had him, under contract before he started bouncing around all over Europe. And so you look at form, Duran much more likely to keep scoring than Marcus Rashford. And if Rashford doesn't come good and we don't wind up making it into Europe next year, if we don't make it farther in the Champions League this year, what is the total value of lost revenue, potential future forced player sales because we don't have incoming new revenue, worse recruitment because we can't pay for better players, that then eats out of that 77 million that we got for John Duran now, where if he torpedoed his value and we only get 40, but hey, you know what? We made the quarterfinals or semifinals of the Champions League. We made it up to 5th place again because he scored enough goals for us. And then you only get 50, 60 next year. I still think that that's a benefit that should have been done. So this is the calculus that Unai and Monchi are making. Clearly, they came out on a different side than I did. All I'm saying is that when you take Rashford's name out of it and you look at those two resumes, they both potential to destabilize. I think what Chris and I want, and I'll speak for Chris now because we've talked about this enough on the side. All we're saying is bring the same energy. We're not necessarily saying that John Duran was a guaranteed better option. We're not necessarily saying that Villa shouldn't have accepted 77 million with a potential rise for him. That's great profit on a guy who did not become a regular starter for us. We get it. But then bring the same energy when you're talking about the risks of Marcus Rashford. This is a risky deal. This was a risky window. We talked about how little Asensio played. We have all the faith in Unai Emery to get through to these guys and ultimately make it happen. But there also is the risk that these become some Philippe Coutinho deals. And so we're just saying we don't necessarily feel like this is an unmitigated successful window. And I kind of went through this. You look at it on paper. One definitive upgrade in Daniel Malin. Probable upgrade in Asensio. Although with Buendia looking good in the Bundesliga, who knows? A wash, potentially better deal in Disasi over Carlos. Ned, definitely a wash. And at least on current form, a downgrade from John Duran to Marcus Rashford. Talking Tactics put it perfectly on Twitter, and I'll paraphrase here, but the idea was, as a general rule, you shouldn't try to make other clubs' problems your problems. Marco Asensio, clearly a problem at PSG. Marcus Rashford, clearly a problem at Manchester United, and those were our two biggest signings of the window, potentially, depending on how you look at it, depending on how you see the press. And so, all faith in Unai Emery. I just have a little bit of skepticism that all of these guys are going to play out the way that we want them to. Finances mean we probably had to. PSR means that we probably had to. But if we look at it from a purely playing perspective, I hope for the best, preparing for the worst. And not not the most optimistic way to end things here, but we are on to Spurs this weekend in the FA Cup 4th round. They had been looking terrible, although they did get a decent win over Brentford over the weekend. So we'll see. Chris and I will do a full preview of that match later this week once he's back, and we will also give the window a grade. We'll get his thoughts on all these deals. And that's kind of it for now. So stay tuned to your feeds for future updates. We're finally back and can begin the legal process to do our giveaway. If you don't know what giveaway we're talking about, you should go listen to our interview with former Villa CEO Paul Faulkner. Great interview, super insightful, but he and Doug drop a bomb at the end of that one. Douglas Wright, that you all will be pretty excited about. So stay tuned, more updates there. And otherwise, all we can say is up the Villa. Hi, Mom and Dad.